Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. My name is John Van Dyke, and I would like to welcome you today to our webinar about sickle cell disease. Uh, this is a 30-minute webinar, so I have very few, limited time to actually do an introduction. This is a highly attended presentation today, mostly attended by our reinsurance and MGU partners. We understand the risks that you face and are diligently working to find clarity in offerings, negotiate rates and terms which mitigate those costs, and develop employer programs that will place your entities in a much safer position. Today's presentation is contrasting and comparing two newly FDA-approved gene therapy treatments for sickle cell disease. We did have an extended conversation with one of those manufacturers, and those discussions will continue. That information gathered is included in this presentation. Next slide. Okay. While our clients will always be able to access Interlink rates and services as the need arises, much of our time and attention is building a program we call Symphony Benefit Solutions. This is an entirely pre-treatment review program whereby any provider would be calling and contacting Interlink Symphony Benefits Solution for authorization. And Chris has been very busy writing authorization protocols for these new high-cost drugs. As a negotiator in healthcare for over 40 years, this is a negotiator's nightmare. One provider, super high costs, negotiating with providers who know often very little about how insurance and reinsurance actually works. It is our opinion that language will be needed. So Symphony Benefit Solutions will have benefit plan language all intertwined that will work for, transplants, cancer, dialysis, and gene and cell therapies. So as a reinsurer, this is an offering that you can plan on. It should become available around 7/1. So next slide. These are the three of us that will be giving the presentation today. Myself, I've been the Chief Executive Officer with Interlink for nearly 30 years and probably been in the healthcare for 40 years. Oscar Bronster is our Chief Medical Officer for Interlink. He oversees the cancer care program.
Eric, please mute.
And then there's Chris Atkins. And Chris Atkins, Oscar and I and Chris all helped build, we're the primary architects and builders of the cancer care program. And we are coming together for gene and cell therapy and also for Symphony. So with that, I'll turn it over to the presenters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know this is a short presentation and we want to jump right into talking about the two new FDA approved drugs, but first I want to give you a quick explanation of sickle cell disease so you can better understand the reason and the need for these novel therapies. Sickle cell disease requires you to have the faulty hemoglobin gene from both parents. If you only have the faulty gene from one parent, you will carry the trait, but with the trait, you will not have the symptoms that you do. You will have to get it from both parents. Over on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a little cartoon that kind of explains sickle cell disease. Typically, red blood cells are round and they flow throughout the blood vessels freely. But in sickle cell disease, they form sickles. And as you can see in this blood vessel, they get all clogged up and they get all knotted up and they block the vessel so that blood can't flow. When blood can't flow, you don't get oxygen. That's what causes the severe pain. And it is debilitating pain. Over on the left-hand side, you can see the characteristics of an adult who's living with sickle cell disease. It affects approximately 100,000 Americans, and it occurs in one out of every 365 Black or African American births. It is predominantly Black and African American that are affected by sickle cell disease. 50 to 60% of the adults end up with end organ disease, so you can imagine the costs attributed. 25% have a stroke by age 45, but the median age of death is also only 45. So these have a much shortened life expectancy. When we talk about the severe pain that sickle cell causes, they're called vaso-occlusive events or vaso-occlusive crises. So we refer to them as VOEs or VOCs. It is written that the VOCs will cost $4 to $6 million in direct lifetime costs, not including what your patient's out of cost is. And they will lose approximately $1.3 million in lifetime earnings compared to their peers because of the quality of life that they have, and they cannot, it limits their academic and professional opportunities. Next slide, please. When we're talking about the two options that we're going to be speaking about today, Dr. Bronster will go into the actual drugs themselves in a moment, but I wanted to talk to you about what the total treatment time takes, because it's not like you go to the office and you just get an injection or you get a treatment. This total treatment will take 8 to 12 months. It takes a minimum of 8 weeks of just giving blood transfusions to these patients before they can even collect the stem cells. They want to make sure that they have enough non-sickled blood in the system to be able to get a good collection. When they do go in for stem cell collection, unlike most stem cell transplants, these stem cell collections are done inpatient. So Lyfgenia is used 1 week per cycle, where Casgevy, used 3 days per cycle. Both of them say that it may take 1 or 2 collections to be able to get enough stem cells to be able to do the treatment. Once the stem cells are collected, it's sent off for product manufacturing and quality assurance. Quality assurance is what actually takes a long time, but it'll take 4 to 6 weeks at the manufacturing facility where they either use the CRISPR technology or the viral vector to modify the cells and then get it to the hospital. Once the patient is admitted, they get a fully myeloablative regimen so that their body is prepared for the introduction of the modified cells. So they both get chemotherapy, and then the modified cells are infused. And you can anticipate 1 month of inpatient hospitalization with this. Once they get out of the hospital, they'll be discharged to home. They will be on about 3 months of medications, but most of these patients require phlebotomy because they have so much blood because of all the transfusions that they've gotten over their lifetime. So they may need phlebotomy for the first 6 months, and then after that, they'll be getting iron chelation, which is very expensive. That costs $20,000 to $25,000 a month for that. Next slide, please. Oscar, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to discuss in some detail these 2 new agents, Lyfgenia and then Casgevy. These are both products that have been introduced to treat patients who have sickle cell disease, though the products work extremely differently. Lyfgenia, which is the Bluebird Bio product, is the standard gene therapy via a viral vector type treatment. On the right, again, we have a cartoon showing what these gene therapies via a viral vector look like. We have modified DNA that is introduced into, in this cartoon, it says an adenovirus, but it can be an adenovirus, an adeno-associated virus, or a lentivirus that is rendered replication defective. So the viral vectors are modified so they will not reproduce or should not reproduce. Then we have extracted the target cells, as Chris demonstrated. Then these viral vectors are then introduced into these stem cells, and they very effectively incorporate into the DNA. The viral component drops off, and the DNA integrates. The stem cells are then modified or reintroduced back into the system, and then they go on to replicate and proliferate. There are specific complications involved with each of these different viral vectors. The Bluebird product used the lentivirus as their vector to introduce their product. Now, the drug class of the Lyfgenia is called an ex vivo virus vector-based gene therapy. That's the process that Chris described for you. Ex vivo means stem cells are extracted from the body, manipulated, and then reinfused back into the body 3 to 4 months after they've been extracted. And then the patient really undergoes what's equivalent to a bone marrow transplant. Patients are in the hospital in general 4 to 6 weeks and have all the costs involved in a 4 to 6 week hospitalization. However, different gene therapies are introduced using different techniques. Some of the genes are introduced in vivo, meaning you take a product off the shelf at an infusion center, like the Hemgenix product, or just infused and the patient's able to go home the same day. Other gene therapy products require injections into the retina. Some of the products are as simple as a cream that's applied, and other products for spinal muscular atrophy require intermittent CNS, central nervous system injection, basically spinal taps, to introduce that gene product. But the two sickle cell products are both ex vivo products. Cells are extracted, modified, and reinfused. Now, the Lyfgenia product and the Casgevy were FDA approved on the same date, 12/8/23. So what's that, 5-6 weeks ago? Bluebird indicates that the Lyfgenia product is going to cost $3.1 million. They have indicated that there will be some outcome-based contracting risk sharing attached to this product, though the nature of the risk sharing, the nature of their warranty is considered proprietary. When we spoke with Bluebird last week, they wouldn't share with us the nature of that warranty, but it does exist, and they use the fact that they have a warranty as part of their marketing of this product. Next slide, please. So again, as Chris pointed out, about 85% of the patients require either 1 or 2 cell collections. It takes about 3 to 4 months, 2 to 3 months to manipulate the drugs and reinfuse them. Engraftment takes about 20 days. Bluebird has an extensive quality treatment controls network, which is basically a COE network. And the network that they've created for the Lyfgenia product is built off of a network they've previously created for Zynteglo. And it's basically at children's hospitals scattered throughout the United States. The indication for Lyfgenia is patients over the age of 12 with sickle cell disease who have a history of vaso-occlusive events. As Chris pointed out, there are about 100,000 patients in America with sickle cell. About 58,000 of these patients are thought to be potential recipients of these gene therapy products. Probably we can redefine that opportunity as 20,000 adults, less than the 58,000 reflected here, but somewhere between 20,000 and 58,000 people with sickle cell disease will potentially benefit from this gene therapy. The Lyfgenia product does come with a black box warning. Hematological malignancies were encountered in 2 patients. In the initial Lyfgenia product, they've then modified this. Subsequently, they haven't had any additional hematologic malignancies. But again, there is a black box warning that accompanies this product. There is no black box warning on the Casgevy product. However, there are other, and we'll show you this in a second, other gene therapies which do carry black box warnings because the gene therapy itself can potentially cause some sort of hematologic malignancy in the recipients. However, it's worth pointing out that patients with sickle cell disease have a dramatically increased risk of hematologic malignancies compared to the baseline general population. Next slide, please. Let's talk about Casgevy for a second. This product is manufactured by CRISPR Therapeutics and Vertex. This product is being marketed at $2.2 million plus associated facility charges. Now, the Lyfgenia product is a standard gene therapy product. It's introducing into the recipient the normal gene to make normal hemoglobin rather than the sickle hemoglobin. So patients, after they get Lyfgenia product, will be able to make both normal hemoglobin and sickle hemoglobin, but the anticipation is that the normal hemoglobin will provide enough oxygen to the patient so that the sickle crises will no longer occur. Casgevy takes a very different approach, and this is the first CRISPR-based product to ever come onto the market. Casgevy actually gets the recipient to increase the production of fetal hemoglobin. There actually are many different forms of hemoglobin, but the most important are the normal hemoglobin, fetal hemoglobin, which you make in utero, and then for the first couple months of life, which carry a lot more oxygen than normal adult hemoglobin, and then the sickle hemoglobin. So the Casgevy product is sort of creative in that it doesn't introduce a normal adult hemoglobin. It increases the amount of fetal hemoglobin that the patient will make, which then brings about enough oxygen that sickle crises no longer occur. Again, the FDA approved this product the same date as the Lyfgenia. It's a little bit less expensive, $2.2 million. The Vertex folks have a more limited network available right now, only 9 authorized treatment centers, but they indicate that by the end of next year, they'll have 75 treatment centers available covering all of the major populations in America. Again, this doesn't have a black box warning. This is a little video we wanted to share with you. Again, the fact that this is a CRISPR-based drug is an absolute breakthrough. Eric, can you run this video, please? It's not working.
One second.
We can't hear it, Eric.
All right, let's let this go.
Yes.
But the CRISPR technology, which was developed at the Broad Institute up at MIT, the people who are responsible for this technology have already won the Nobel Prize last year. This is technology which is very novel, that it allows you to edit the human genome. It does not require a viral vector to be effective. It's potentially going to have a role in many, many, many diseases. Next slide, please. So again, the indication for Casgevy is sickle cell disease in patients 12 years of age and older. Same population it's addressing. Casgevy was approved just last week to treat beta thalassemia as well as sickle cell disease. And there are only about 1,000 potential adults or pediatric patients in America with beta thalassemia. Bluebird has a separate product, which they have approval for to treat thalassemia. It is interesting pointing out why patients have sickle cell disease. Patients who carry sickle cell disease are relatively resistant to malaria. So sickle cell disease evolved in Africa where there was endemic malaria, and individuals who had sickle cell disease actually had a survival advantage. And the way these drugs are being marketed is somewhat different. There's competition, obviously, between Bluebird and Vertex. The Casgevy people claim that 75% of the physicians that they've interviewed prefer gene editing rather than standard viral vector-based gene therapy, because there is really not a significant risk of hematologic malignancy with the Casgevy product, but there is the potential for some off-target editing, which isn't desirable. Both of these drugs are dramatic and important introductions to treat a lethal disease, but they both have significant side effects associated with them. Next slide, please. And let me turn this back over to Chris at this point in time.
Thank you, Oscar. He's given us a lot of great information about the two drugs that we wanted to speak about today. But I also wanted to tell you about the current state. So you could actually see what the current state of gene and cellular therapy is. You can see by this pie graph that the majority of all gene and cellular therapies are for hematologic indications. And then there's a lot of little indications. But those indications are growing as we go. And I'll speak a little bit more to that when we get to the future state. But I wanted you to be able to see this as a good visual picture of what is the current state of gene and cellular therapy. Next slide, please. Oscar talked about the black box warnings, and I'll go over this slide very quickly. But there are many different drugs or gene therapies that actually are coming out with black box warnings. So we wanted to share some of those. Lyfgenia and Skysona are both Bluebird products, and both of them do have a black box warnings for hematologic malignancies. Skysona's is tied directly to the lentiviral vector that they used. And when they switched to the viral vector with Lyfgenia, after those first two malignancies, they had no more. Omaserge actually had severe reactions with graft versus host, engraftment syndrome, and graft failure. The interesting thing about Zolgensma is it was FDA approved in February of 2023. It came out initially with a black box warnings for a serious liver injury and acute liver failure. But interestingly enough, after market approval, they have come out with more black box warnings and more aggressive black box warnings in October of 2023. So the original black box warnings don't mean that that's the end. They are going to continue to update with warnings as post-market treatments are given. Next slide, please. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Bronster.
Just real quickly, as I mentioned, there have been concerns with the CAR T cell treatment that's been in the market now for 7 or 8 years. Our ability to manipulate CAR T is dramatically better now than it was then. We hope we have progress in our ability to use and manipulate these gene therapy products. But with CAR T, there were limitations, challenges existed interfering with therapeutic efficacy. To begin with, the cost of the CAR T treatment was stunning, though compared to the gene therapy costs, CAR Ts are a fraction of the price. But there were some serious adverse effects connected initially with the CAR T, which are much less frequent now where we've learned how to use these products better. So we have fewer toxicities. We don't see the kind of neurotoxicities that we had. We don't see the cytokine release syndromes that we initially experienced. There can be some antigen escape even with the CAR Ts, and the persistence of these antigens can result in tumor relapse. The real world experience with CAR Ts is quite good, but really not as exciting as the clinical trials had indicated. There are new strategies evolving with CAR T treatment. We want to make sure that we have the best affinity tuning possible, that we have, most importantly, what we call BiTE therapy now, where CAR T initially was directed at a single target. With the BiTE therapy, these T cell manipulated cells will target multiple sites on the cancer cells and be more effective. And we also soon will have CAR T treatment that we can take off the shelf, which will be much less expensive than having to extract cells, manipulate them, and then reinfuse them. Now, with gene therapy, there is a potential for infertility, which is true with any bone marrow transplant and fully myeloablative treatment. We do not know how long gene therapy is going to last. We do not know if the durability is going to be limited to 5 to 7 years or whether it will be lifelong. The CRISPR therapies, there is concern that as we edit the genome, we may hit some undesired targets on the genome. That's more a theoretical than an actual concern, but it's something we are very worried about or concerned about, and we are developing new and better refined CRISPR therapies already. And again, with the viral vector-based therapies, there's concern for malignancies. The adenovirus was the initial vector used. We don't use that anymore because malignancies were so common in that setting. But we do see it, though less frequently, with the adeno-associated virus vectors and also with the lentivirus vectors. And again, we use chemotherapy to prepare people for these infusions, and the chemotherapy itself has secondary cancers associated with it. Next slide, please. And again, just some controversies. It was pointed out by Dr. Brodsky at Hopkins that while these new gene therapies are potentially life-changing for individuals with sickle cell disease, they must be accessible to be effective. Many patients with sickle cell disease have Medicaid, some have Medicare. We have to price these products in a way that patients who need them have access to them. Very provocatively here, the Institute for Clinical and Economic Research, ICER, released a report saying both Casgevy and Lyfgenia would be cost effective if priced between $1.3 and $2.05 million. Both products are significantly more expensive than that. ICER analysts found that both therapies are likely to improve quality and length of life, but that was using a $2 million placeholder for both. Again, the Lyfgenia is 3.1 and the Casgevy is $2.2 million. A recent working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research estimated that by the end of 2034, over 1 million patients will have received treatment with genes costing more than $25 billion per year. This would cost Medicare $7.8 billion, Medicaid $5.4 billion, and $12.2 billion for private insurers. Again, just to give you some context here, European history negotiations with Bluebird Bio and Zynteglo was interesting. Zynteglo is currently marketed for $2.8 million in the US, but Bluebird offered it to the European markets for $1.8 million, but was unable to reach an agreement on price based on the inability to prove the therapeutic value of the new drug compared to the standard treatment for the same indication. I believe the Europeans offered about $900,000 for this product. And in fact, what the Europeans wanted to do was, rather than get a rebate or a warranty, they wanted to limit payment up front and then pay additional money 3 years later if the drug was still effective. That approach was not acceptable to the Bluebird people, and they withdrew these products entirely from the European market. Next slide, please. Let me turn this back to Chris for the last 2 slides.
Thank you, Oscar. We've spoken about sickle cell disease, about the 2 gene therapies that were FDA approved. We've talked about the current state and the concerns and controversies. I just want to spend a minute or 2 here on the future state of gene and cell therapy. Upcoming, we've got 5 gene and cell therapies with PDUFA dates in Q1 of 2024. For those of you that don't know what a PDUFA date is, it stands for Prescription Drug User Fee Act. But what it really is, it's the date assigned by the FDA for the end of their review period. So that's when you would expect to either get an approval or a denial. Abecma is cellular therapy that's currently on the market for multiple myeloma, but it's 5th-line therapy, and they're asking for an increased indication to 3rd or 4th line. Casgevy, Oscar already spoke about that being approved last week, and we've got 3 more that are expected approvals or expected end of reviews for Q1. The important thing that we need to learn about is that CAR T cells came out in 2016. So they've been on the market for 6 years. And we can only anticipate that what we have learned with the CAR T cells, we will also hopefully learn with gene cell therapy. So as the experience has matured, we have brought the cost down because we've understood the toxicities like Dr. Bronster spoke of, and with the addition of the off-the-shelf CAR T cells and new payment methods, hopefully we'll be able to get those down completely. Next slide, please. Nearly 4,000 therapies are currently in development. 53% of those are gene therapies, 22% are cellular therapies, and 25% are RNA therapies. The current state shows the majority of gene and cell therapies being approved for hematologic indications. where the future state includes many trials for solid tumors. But most interestingly is that from Q1 to Q4 of 2023, non-oncology indications for gene and cell therapy have increased from 27% to 39%. So who knows where this future state is going to continue to go. We're at time, so I want to pass it back to John, see if there are any questions.
Eric can look for questions, but I'd just be amiss if I didn't say that the reinsurance integration training schedule applications are due by February 5th. These are for clients. It's a 1-year training program, and it has 4 segments that would cover transplants, dialysis, um, cancer, and gene and cell therapies. So if you haven't signed up and you're a reinsurer nurse, we would love for you to do so. So Eric, are there any questions out there?
Yeah, it looks like we have one here. Are there any administrators attempting to push the gene therapies to be covered under RX plans, or is it always medical?
My understanding is it's going to be covered under medical. The RX plans typically are for outpatient things, and this is inpatient, just like stem cell therapy, just like CAR T therapy. So my understanding is that they will be covered under medical.
Okay. It looks like there's another question here. Is the treatment one time only? Are there any expectations that patients will need to undergo multiple treatment intervals?
Yeah, let me take that. So the expectation is these are one-time only treatments, justifying the costs attached to these. But whether these drugs or whether these gene therapies are going to be durable, how long they're going to last is something we're going to see. The trials went out to 3, and some of the trials went out as far as 5 years. But beyond that, we don't know if these gene therapies are going to survive the life of the recipient. And again, if these products don't work, some of the products come with a warranty that there will be a rebate to the payer. But as I pointed out, while Bluebird indicates with their product there is a warranty, we don't know what that warranty is. They consider that information proprietary, and they were not willing to share that with us, despite the fact we were on the phone with them last week. But it should be lifetime treatment if these products work the way we hope they do. One time
And
only.
just one more thing I want to add is who is going to follow up on these warranties? And one thing I do want to say just quickly, through the Symphony Benefit Solutions, we will actually monitor for the warranties and make sure, because we know that patients are going to transfer, insurance companies transfer reinsurance companies, and we want to make sure. So if you have a concern, if you have questions, if you have needs, please reach out to us and reach out to your account manager, and we'll talk to you more about the actual Symphony Benefit Solution program that we're planning to launch in July.
Looks like we have just 2 more questions. One is centered around are the meds indicated for children as well as adults, or what's the minimum age for indication?
For these particular drugs, they have to be 12 years old. They were not studied in a clinical trial under the age of 12. So for these 2 particular ones, they are 12 years and over. Each individual gene therapy will carry its own indications.
Yeah, there are some gene therapies which are specifically directed at children, and if you're older than a certain age, you don't qualify. Some of the spinal muscular atrophy products or the Duchenne muscular dystrophy products are for children under the age of 10. So these products are very different. There's nothing that's one size fits all in the gene therapy arena.
Last question here. Since 75% of physicians prefer gene editing, does that mean Casgevy would be preferred over Lyfgenia?
Well, that's their marketing pitch. I just included that so you understand the different marketing approaches that are being used. I don't know if that's true, but it's a survey that they say they did, and that's the outcomes that they are reporting. Interestingly, the CRISPR approach is novel. We've never had a drug with CRISPR before. So we're going to see just how effective in real world settings that approach is. We're extremely optimistic that this is a breakthrough. As I said, the CRISPR approach won the Nobel Prize just this year. The lentiviral vector approach that Bluebird uses is a more traditional approach. I think the market's going to have to decide if the price difference is significant, if the more established approach using the lentiviral vector outweighs using a new CRISPR-based approach. I think the future is hard to predict, Eric.
Okay, it looks like we have one or two more coming in if you guys are open to answering them.
Sure.
Certainly.
Will you be contracting for optimal rates limiting to MFG invoice cost for the product?
I'll probably take that one for sure. That is the preferred method for, I think it's ex vivo, where it's like a bone marrow transplant. A lot of those contracting will be done through the centers of excellence, and that's a very standard contract term for us. Yes, so the answer is yes.
Okay, and looks like last question, what is the timeline to allogeneic off-the-shelf products?
So the allogeneic off-the-shelf products are in the CAR T arena, not in the gene therapy arena, and they're here, and they're here, and we should see those products introduced and more widely used over the next year.
Okay, it looks like that is all of the questions that we have at this time, although there is one about sending slide decks. So maybe John, you can speak to that.
For certain. This has been recorded. If you need a copy, or just get a hold of Eric Caballero, or in this instance, since you have the name and number of some of the people, you might just reach out to them directly. So I want to thank you for your time today. This is a rapidly evolving industry and change. I think all companies are working really hard now to come up with strategies about how to be successful in this high cost and changing environment. So here at Interlink, we're working day in and day out to try to deliver products to our clients that will make their programs healthy, protect your assets, get your people treated. So thank you for your time, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you for all coming.